Well, hello, welcome to the Student Symposium hosted by the Alberta Library. As you can see, we have all our wonderful panelists here ready to talk about their experiences getting hired, doing interviews, just general library tech archives experience, as well as also just what it's like being in your job near the beginning or trying to get jobs, that kind of stuff. So thank you first again, all panelists, for being here and being willing to share your experiences and your ideas, as well as just thanks all participants for coming, because I mean, it's cool that you're getting on top of this kind of thing. And I'm glad to be able that we can present this kind of stuff for you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to learn a lot. So we'll just wait maybe a minute, half a minute, TV time, 30 seconds, until we want to start here. I guess for now, I'll just kind of say what the Alberta Library is, because sometimes people don't know. So the Alberta Library, not a library as much as its name says, what it is a consortium, which is a group, a nonprofit group that supports libraries across Alberta. We have members from north to south, east to west, all over the place, and we support them through licensing, events, training, any of that kind of stuff. A lot of the provinces have their own version of that kind of thing under various names. Yeah, so since it seems like the people coming in has slowed down, I think we can probably start. So if everybody's ready, then Kaia, I think you are number one.
Excellent. Howdy, y'all. My name is Kaia MacLeod. I'm a member of the James Smith Cree Nation, and I am the Indigenous Cataloging Librarian here at the University of Calgary. So, a little bit about me. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, majoring in Film Studies, or as I like to call it, movie watching, and then I got my MLIS on campus at the University of Alberta. I've been in this position for just over 2.5 years, so I did have to move for my job, but it was definitely worth it. When applying for jobs, I was applying in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and I was just looking for somewhere kind of close to home. I'm from Edmonton. I didn't want to get too far from the prairies. And I ended up getting this excellent tenure track position as a cataloging librarian at the university. I think, oh, yeah, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I find that a willingness and an ability to move is key when you're in library school. It doesn't mean you got to move to the other side of the country, but knowing that you could pick up sticks and move down even 3 hours to Grand Old Calgary can make the difference between getting a job immediately out of library school and not. When it comes to interviews, I tend to take a look at, hey, my friends are interviewing for positions, and what kind of questions are they being asked. So years ago, when I was interviewing for a bunch of things, a lot of my cohort was doing public libraries. So as an academic librarian, you get asked slightly different things. You're asked about, hey, what are your research interests? Are you planning on publishing anything? Do you have anything forthcoming? These are all important things to note. And I had the unique experience of doing all of my interviews via Zoom because the pandemic had happened. So I'm going to talk a little bit about settling into the job. I moved mid-pandemic, and it was very strange moving and being away from my family. And then suddenly, oh, you're out of library school, you're in an academic position, what are you supposed to do? And what I found was really helpful was meeting a bunch of people. Working as a cataloging librarian, we work on like a different campus entirely than the main campus. So I'm actually on the main campus today because I gave an art tour. I can talk about that later if any of y'all are interested. But basically, we're seconded out where the high density library is, all the books that aren't on the shelves. And that means if you want to actually meet anybody on main campus, you have to put in the effort, be able to say, hey, why don't we have a coffee? Tell me about your job. Tell me what you're researching. And it can be really nice to just expand the number of people that you know. it equally can help you find different things on campus. Like I basically go between the main library and the library I work on. I don't really need to explore what's in business or anything. But if I have a meeting there, it's going to be helpful if I know where the building is. I equally find just talking not entirely about work, but personal life, a new job, getting a new job and moving is the perfect time to install new habits. Like make sure that you're actually leaving on time. Make sure that you're not checking your emails when you're on vacation. Your time is your own, and that is all right. You want to be able to have an identity outside of work. You don't just want to be the librarian. You want to be the librarian who plays D&D or whatever. You need to be able to exist outside of your job. Volunteer, have hobbies, all of that jazz. When it comes to my CV, so from the academic tenure track perspective, publications, if you are aiming for an academic position, they care about publications, even if it isn't published yet. If it is something that's forthcoming, you can put it in brackets and say that's forthcoming. For instance, I submitted a encyclopedia entry this year. I have no idea when it's actually going to get published, if it's going to be this year or next year. It's been edited like 3 times. But I've had that on my CV since I started writing it. I was like, yes, this is forthcoming. We just don't have any idea what the date is. From when I was back in library school, what I think really stood out for me getting this position was the fact that I did student governance. I was the president of the library's student association at the University of Alberta. I was therefore able to show I'm willing to sit on. If we had to break down my job, 90% of it is my day-to-day stuff, 5% is research and scholarship. Yes, scholarship being all the writing, not the actual giving money. And of course, the last 5% is committee work. I was on like 8 committees last year. Committee work is a big thing. And talking about what skills would be most helpful for early career librarians, I think a willingness to learn, an ability to ask for help, and to be able to explain projects outside of your unit. So for instance, I just did a renewal package, and being able to explain to the head librarian who does not necessarily understand cataloging what I actually do day to day is very different than explaining to my boss who understands cataloging what I actually do. Yeah, I feel like I talked very fast, but I'll let the next person go.
Okay, hi, my name's Brenna Van Boeschoten. So a brief description of my education and my current job. I began the Library Information Technology program at SAIT in 2021, and I graduated in 2023. I was 41 when I started my studies, and I had spent the last several years as a stay-at-home mom. During the pandemic, my husband lost his job, and I wasn't able to find work in my previous field of study, which was administration. I needed to go back to school to make myself hireable. I already knew that I wanted to take the LIT program as I planned to take it in the future, just not at this point. In June of 2022, between my first and second year of the LIT program, a local school in my community had a job opening. I applied thinking that if I got the job, I could take the rest of my program by distance. I hadn't heard anything back about the job, so I continued my studies in person. In October, I was contacted to see if I'd like to interview for the position. I knew it was a long shot since I was already in school at that time, but I thought it was worth it for the interview practice. And surprisingly, I got the job. They were very accommodating and worked really well with around my school schedule until I graduated. Currently, I serve as a Learning Commons librarian for the Calgary Catholic School Board. Just a second here. I have plenty of support from other Learning Commons librarians in the district and through the IMC. My responsibilities encompass a wide range of duties, including collection development, cataloging materials, weeding, managing, checking in and checking out books for students and staff, shelving, storytelling, organizing the Scholastic Book Fair, coordinating author visits, and overseeing Chromebook management, among other tasks that are essential to the library's operation. So essentially in my school, if it involves the library, I'm involved, and often if it involves technology, I'm also involved. And this year, I've also taken on the responsibility of training grade 6 helpers in shelving and the fundamentals of library operation. And okay, so when I went to school, they told us that we probably would have to consider moving if we wanted to get a job. I was fortunate that I got a job in my community as I was in school, so I didn't have to consider that. But for me, I would consider moving because I think I like small towns personally, so I would be fine with that. And then the next question was, how do I prepare for interviews? And so the first thing I do when I'm preparing for an interview is I start by carefully reading the job posting again, making sure to save a copy of the job posting when you apply so that you can refer back to it. And you also want to be able to have a copy of that so you can give it to your references so they can be prepared for reference calls and so they can say the things that what you bring to the job. I also make a list of skills and experiences I've had that relate to the job and might be relevant to the questions the interviewer might ask me. I find it important to have examples prepared ahead of time so I'm not caught off guard. One of my last interviews, they said, feel free to bring a cheat sheet. So that's something I do in case they're willing for me to have that. I also research what kind of questions might be asked and get someone to interview me for practice. Another thing I do is I carefully research the organization, as employers are generally impressed when you know about their initiatives or the things that they do for the community. For example, I once interviewed for an insurance company, and they were really big into giving back to the community, and they were quite impressed that I knew about all of their initiatives, and I ended up getting the job there. So if I was going to go for a public library job, I'd probably look into the initiatives and the things that they do for the community. I also I follow Advice with Erin on Instagram, and I watch some of her videos. She has really good advice about interviewing, as well as cover letters, resumes, and employment advice. There's many other places online that you can get free advice as well. And then another thing I try to do is just relax and be myself. That's not always as easy as it sounds, but that's what I try to do. And then so my most successful interview was when I was interviewing for a summer internship job between my first and second year. I already had received a job offer from the first place that I'd interviewed. So at the second interview, I just had a lot of fun with it. It was so relaxing because there was no risk involved. And now I try to remind myself just to relax and have fun with it, because that was just the easiest interview I've ever faced, and I loved the feeling afterward. And then my first job, or the first month at my current job, was pretty difficult. I had library training through SAIT, but I didn't have any actual real experience at that point. I'd never used an ILS before. I wasn't aware of the library's protocols. They were really good to me, and they said, this is your library, do as you wish with it, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I had to recognize that when I was hired, they knew I wasn't experienced, but they saw the value in hiring me anyways. So I found out who could help me learn, and I made appointments with them to help me. I took notes, made myself cheat sheets. I used until I knew what I was doing. If someone asked me for help and I didn't know the answer, I asked for a bit of time and researched and found the answers they needed. I'd also say, when you're taking over a library, if you're in my position, not to make a bunch of changes right away. Get used to how the library works. Over time, you'll see what works and what doesn't. Then you'll be more qualified to make changes as time goes on. And then if there's anything on my resume that I felt was essential, one of the things that I have on my resume is I made sure to add any affiliations I had. For example, I applied for a records management job for a summer internship, so I joined ARMA and added it to my resume. I also have library affiliations such as the Foothills Library Association, as I think that strengthens my resume. And then for skills that are important in the early careers, I think adaptability is crucial to have during the early years, as the job might not being exactly what you thought, as my job isn't exactly what I considered, but I'm just adapting and changing as I go. And as Kaia said, the willingness to learn and ask for help is really important.
Okay, that must be a start for me, right? I'm James MacDonald. I'm the executive director at Northern Lights Library System. We're one of 7 regional library systems in Alberta. We serve 61 municipalities and 50 odd libraries, mostly rural. So my education and that's my job, but education. I did have a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in history. I got that from the University of Lethbridge. While I was doing my Bachelor of Arts, I took a library studies class. This was a while ago. That really kind of primed me. And I also did an internship in the university archives, and I just had some great mentors, and they pushed me towards library school. So I went to the University of Alberta and got my MLIS from there. Feels like forever ago. But along the way, I didn't give up on education, always doing different certifications, some of the bigger ones. And when you're employed, hopefully your employers will pay for these. I did certify as a digital archives specialist with the Society of American Archivists. And I just actually, in February here, completed my executive MBA. It's Quantic Online, which is pretty cool. So, as far as moving for jobs, yeah, I've done it a lot. A lot. And so if you're at all open to that, I'd say do it. It's good. It's good to get those experiences. I actually started my career here at Elk Point at Northern Lights Library System. I started on a contract for a year as a training and development librarian. That quickly turned into managing the information technology for the system. And because I chose a small, and I say chose because this, I actually did have multiple job offers. I don't think that's unique to me. When you're in grad school and you're applying for everything and anything, you may get a few, which was I was lucky, and I think others will be too. Anyway, I chose to come here to Elk Point, this tiny little place serving a lot of different communities, but it's very rural. There are more cows than people. But when you do that, when you choose a smaller place, you get to wear all the hats. In a system serving so many public libraries, is able to take on managing the information technology and actually help shepherd Northern Lights and 3 other regional library systems through moving from Dynex library system to Polaris library system. It was a bit of a baptism by fire, but just really set me up for the rest of my career. I went from Elk Point here to the University of Northern British Columbia as a web services librarian. I was there for 3 or 4 years. It was great, although I will say I love public libraries. I remember 2 weeks on the job at UNBC and being in my office and just putting my head in my hands like, what have I done? This is a very different environment in academics, but I still loved it. It was great, and I won't speak to all the publishing and things you need to do to get tenure. I eventually did that, but not before moving from UNBC to the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, just north of Dubai. I was there for a couple of years. That was a fantastic move. I was worried about it. I packed up my 3 kids and our 2 little dogs and my partner, and we went out to the Middle East, which was scary, but a beautiful growing opportunity. We were there for a couple of years, and then I took a job back at the University of Northern British Columbia. And so I came back as the digital initiatives librarian, and was there for another 3-4 years. I became the acting university librarian for about 18 months. And they asked me to apply for the job. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to see what else is out there. If I'm going to apply, I will go through. And so it turns out that I got a job with the Church History Library in downtown Salt Lake City. So this is a private church organization. It's world-class in terms of what they do there. Digitization work. This is where I did my digital archives certification. I was the head of reference. So I had 9 librarians and public historians working for me, answering questions from around the world. It's very focused on Western history, Western United States, Western Canada. And so it was fantastic. I really enjoyed myself. I was there for 3 years before I took the job back here as the executive director at Northern Lights. So I've been around and around, and I've been here for about 3 years now, really enjoying it. So I've done a lot of interviews. I've interviewed a lot of people, and you've already heard some great advice about preparing for interviews. Some of the things I do, I like to just bullet point stories and experiences, things that are going to help me answer questions and relate my experiences to the questions that are being asked. And of course, I do all those other things like research where I'm applying to, printing off the job description. That's all great advice. But I do think, bullet pointing your experiences, even when you're, just starting out. One of my favorite job interviews was while I was in grad school. I applied for a job at a university in Hawaii, and they flew me out there for an interview. So don't be afraid to apply to crazy places. You might get a free trip out of things. So anyway, writing down those experiences and what you do, and don't be afraid to talk about your mistakes. Just when you're talking about your mistakes, be sure to back that up with, this is what I do differently as a result of that. It's going to show that you're reflective, that you can make changes. It's okay to talk about those. In fact, as an interviewer, I like to see that. One of my favorite interview questions is to ask, when have you made a mistake that's had a really negative impact on others? And then what did you do about that? So be prepared for that one. Settling in, you're bound to be nervous during interviews. You're bound to be nervous when you first get there. As I tell my consultants that work for me all the time, 90% of your job is relationship building. I think that really goes for everywhere. It's relationship building. Get to know your colleagues, get to know the people that you serve, be dependable, and just remember this is a long haul. So just work, but you don't have to go crazy, right? Just work and enjoy it and get to know people, and you're going to be there for a long time, hopefully. So take your time. Essential to your CV, I think education really truly is the ticket that opens the door. So consider what you're doing for your education. Now you're all in school, so that's great. It's more likely the case that the door will not be opened at all for you at places like universities if you don't have the requisite education under your belt. That said, if you are pursuing an MLIS, a bachelor's degree is a great ticket into an organization. I've had multiple people work for me that I've hired with a bachelor's degree and then paid for their MLIS as they've worked for me. And one of them just here in Elk Point, just in the last year or so, just finished his MLIS. We paid for that. So what am I looking for if I'm not looking for that education? And I can't really see this on the CV. So what are your most important skills? It's really ultimately being articulate, being able to write, being able to communicate well, become a good storyteller, learn to do the research, learn to learn, and then, and say yes to opportunities that arise, take on challenges, right? Find those solid mentors. But what I'm looking for with people when I hire is I'm looking for people that are intelligent and articulate and that can communicate really well, that I know will build relationships with other people. Those are the things I'm really focused on. The other stuff is kind of superfluous. We can get you that stuff. We can train you up, but concentrate on your writing and your communication. That's all I got. So I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Erin Hoar, and I'm the archivist for the United Farmers Historical Society in Calgary, which is a nonprofit organization that preserves and makes available the historical records and artifacts of the United Farmers of Alberta, or UFA, more commonly known as. I am the only full-time staff member here, and I currently do have a part-time student, and she's actually here right now. I also work part-time in patron services for the Internet Archive, which is a fully online work experience. I completed my MLIS at the University of Alberta in 2020. as well as a cultural resource management diploma from the University of Victoria. I have a BA in history from MacEwan University, and I've also previously done a management diploma from NAIT. I actually previously worked at the University of Alberta Archives, and prior to my MLIS, I was in the museums and heritage field for about 7 years or so. So I did pivot, did a career change, but still something a little bit relatable for sure. I also enjoy doing committee work, and so I've served on various boards and committees, including Vice President of the Archive Society of Alberta and President of the U of A's Library and Information Studies Students Association. So I actually moved for the job that I have now. I moved from Edmonton to Calgary, and it was a really good career move for me because the job really aligned with my education. So I do come from a farming background, so working for the UFA, also my interest in history, and then just graduating with the MLIS, it was kind of a perfect fit for me. And so they were also looking for an archivist right when I was finishing grad school. So I feel really lucky that the stars kind of aligned all for that. I have been here for 4 years now, and I still really enjoy it. So I do think a job move is worth it, especially if it's one that you could see yourself in long term. So if you find kind of that perfect role, it's always worth it to just dive in and take the chance. And moving to a new city, I didn't know much about Calgary at all before moving here, despite only being 3 hours away, and ended up loving it. And I'm likely going to stay here, hopefully. So yeah, to prepare for interviews. Just as others have said, I do really look at the website and their social media to really get a feel for the organization. Yeah, so sometimes I'll also actually see if anyone works here that maybe I used to know or they used to work there, because then you can ask questions and get a real just find out a little bit about the workplace as well. I definitely go through the job ad just really meticulously. I pick out specific examples from my past work experiences that I can talk about to demonstrate how I fulfill what the organization is looking for. I also prepare by just getting comfortable and confident talking about myself, because when you're there in the moment, it can actually be a lot more difficult than it seems. And so just that preparation of just being confident and yeah, talking well about yourself is a good preparation tool as well. I also have a physical portfolio that I bring with me just with samples of work. So I include like record inventories that I've created, photos of different exhibits that I've done, like blog posts or any writing that I've published. And I've actually found that employers tend to really appreciate this. They enjoy having something to like flip through. And so rather than just saying that I'm good at doing inventories, I can physically show them this is how organized I am, and just provides concrete examples of my work. I've learned that my best interviews are when I really want the job for sure, and I'm confident in what the organization is looking for, and that I have the experience and skills to demonstrate my fit. So being able to present tangible and relatable examples of my prior work. So for example, instead of saying I'm really good at fulfilling reference requests, I'll say something like, I've grown reference requests by 50% by doing such and such, like enhancing our social media or reaching out to different departments. Something like that just kind of gives a good visual of not what I've done, but how I've actually excelled at it. And that tends to resonate a lot better with people. Yeah, just looking for concrete examples. I do hire students at my archives, and I've hired 4 in the past 2 years, mostly through the Young Canada Works in Heritage grant. I will look for a practical experience that's related to the field, such as like volunteer work, an internship, participation in a work experience program, maybe through their school, or if they've had a previous summer student role, as well as an indication that they are interested in the field and not just looking for any job. And I would like them to have at least some interest in working for my organization. Not all students will have prior archiving experience, so I definitely take transferable skills into account. So data entry, database skills, customer service, which does come in handy with working with researchers, strong writing capabilities, the ability to conduct research and use technology like a camera or digital scanner. I'll look for all of that as well. And so I do find sometimes students tend to really downplay some of those skills, like especially customer service, but it really does come in handy. Some of the skills or traits that I think are important for an early career job is, as others have already said, a willingness to learn, being open to new approaches, a commitment to continue learning throughout your career, such as through courses and conferences, being flexible and being able to identify opportunities, recognizing that what you have planned may not always work out, but this isn't a bad thing. I found that really being open to different opportunities can take you in directions you otherwise may not have considered. And so really just don't limit yourself to where you think an archivist should work, especially when you're coming right out of school. And then just a note on the practical side for archives, data entry, database skills, digitization skills, as well as being organized, a good communicator, and a good engager, which really comes in handy when you need to promote the value of archives. Is all really key skills. And one that's often forgot, the ability to read cursive really comes in handy as well. Yeah, and that's about all I have for there.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Darel Bennedbaek. I am the brand new CEO of the Alberta Library. I started here January 1st. And let me start by saying that moving at the beginning of the career, I certainly considered it, and moving mid-career and late career probably is a thing that might happen to you as well. I'm currently trying to figure out how to move from Lethbridge up to Edmonton. And, you know, I'm making progress, but right now I'm just waiting for like houses to sell and all that kind of stuff. So it takes a while. Being patient with yourself and just being able to be flexible, and it's a little bit easier than it is today, than it was in the past. It's a little bit easier today because, you know, you can do a lot of work remotely. There's opportunity to be able to, you know, if something is coming up that you need to be in a place, you can fly there, you could do your stuff, and then you can go back, for example. So that sort of stuff, it makes it a little bit easier, but I would say never, or not never, but consider very much to say yes to opportunities, even if it requires travel. Because if you're trying to get your foot in the door or just get your career started, it's particularly integral. My first move was from Edmonton down to Lacombe, where I started at a small university. And in that situation there, I would say that the move itself, while it wasn't big, I really needed to get help to get this job. So my background is in English literature, and I never actually considered libraries until essentially a couple of months before applying to library school. And the reason for that was I was like, okay, I have an English degree. I'm going to go get myself a master's, a PhD, and I'll be like an English prof. And my whole life is like just perfect. This is not a problem. I don't have to think about anything. And then they told me that I could be a spy if I were a librarian. So I was like, that's cool. I should do that. But honestly, it was one of the regional library directors in Lacombe who actually got me started. He was talking to me about all the cool things that libraries could do. And I started thinking about that in terms of, okay, here's what a professor will do, here's what a librarian could do. And the more that I looked at it, the more I just liked the idea of being a librarian. So being open to new experiences throughout the whole time is extraordinarily important. But I do think I've gotten lucky so far. I haven't had to move extraordinarily far, but a lot of my colleagues, they did have to move out of province. Like my classmates, for their first jobs, they often did have to move fairly far. And some of them who didn't move, they got careers in different fields, which it's in and of itself, of course, it's not a bad thing, but that's just a thing to be aware of. Library jobs can be a bit competitive, I would think. I certainly had to. I went through a number of interviews, and I didn't have as many like job offers as James did. I ended up having 2 or 3, but even the one that I got, like I said, I needed help to get it, and this is something that I think it's a thing that I look for in people that I'm looking to hire, but it's also something that I think is extremely valuable to cultivate in yourself, which is just to learn to know when you need help and don't be afraid to ask it. So on my first interview for the job that I actually got, my very first library job, they needed me to do a presentation on RDA cataloging. And I was not a cataloger. I didn't take cataloging in school. Even though like there was a course there on cataloging, I just kind of skipped it. I did other stuff. And that was perhaps not the wisest thing. But nevertheless, there it was in my first interview. And this was for a systems librarian position that included a bunch of technical services. So I really had to go and talk to people who knew this stuff. And one of the librarians at the University of Alberta actually sat down with me, and he'd been working on RDA cataloging and implementation for a number of years. And he essentially helped me craft the presentation, made sure that I understood what I was getting into. And then I knew that once I actually got into it, I knew who to talk to actually be able to continue to do the job correctly. Because that's the other thing, right? Like sometimes I kind of get stuck where I think, okay, I have to know how to do this job 100% before I can do it. In some cases, that's absolutely true. In other cases, not so much, because you can learn on the job. And that is, as other people have said, probably one of the most important things that if you can show that you can do that, that's what's going to make the difference in terms of whether or not you get hired. So for the second job that I got, I also did what people have said here. I had all of these projects and all of these interesting things that I looked through in my life, or I just sat down and like did some memory play and was like, oh, look at that. That was cool. That was interesting. Wrote them all down. And then I went over the job ad and just kind of linked it to each of the potential areas of expertise that was needed. And I will put a plug in here for not being worried about going to a small place for your first job. Don't underestimate how extraordinarily useful that can be, because when my first job, it was a systems librarian position, but it was in a small university where it was me, one other librarian, and a library tech. So that meant that the number of different jobs that I had to learn how to do quickly was very, very high. The number of committees that I had to serve on, because as a faculty member in the university, you had to serve on committees. I was put on stuff that sometimes I had expertise in, sometimes I had a lot of things to learn. But what that does was that kind of forced me to just learn how to be more flexible more quickly. So if someone in a small, tiny place says that they will offer you a job, take it and don't be afraid to start experimenting. By the time I'd been in my job, that first job, for about 6 years, I'd already started all sorts of interesting projects, and then virtual reality came along, and I just was able to go to my boss at the time and the VP of academics and say, hey, this is a cool technology, we need to do this. And we just got it off and going. And that particular project was one of the main things that the next job was looking for. So be open to experimentation, but to experiment properly, you have to build relationships. You've got to be able to know who in your organization is interested in like new projects or the projects that you're interested in. You also have to know who outside of your immediate area might be interested in those things, and then just go out and talk to them. More often than not, you might find something cool. You might even start something, but if neither of those things happen, you've still made that contact and that relationship for when reality comes along. My favorite thing, actually, and it's a silly thing that's stuck in my brain ever since my first day in library school. Arnie Ingalls, he was the head of the library school when I was going back in, I think, 2010, and he sat down, the whole group of students sat down in the room with him, and he just spoke about his experiences, kind of like this. And he said, one of the things that you just have to do is get comfortable with prostituting yourself out there for a whole bunch of interesting things. And of course, the way he put it, it stuck in my mind, but it's not entirely wrong. being able to go and find those new things, even if it's not something that you've come up with, if you see something that is very, very cool and you're interested in it, work with your boss, or if you have freedom to kind of work with yourself, then do it. Okay, I'm rambling. CVs. Essentially, when I put together my CV, I do all the education. I also put relevant skills, relevant training beyond just the like official university education. I like to build mine in Canva because it lets me be a little bit flashy while still maintain minimalism, which is something that I like. And it lets me control a little bit more how things look. I always find Word is a bit too restrictive. When I'm looking at people's resumes, though, I will not necessarily look at how they've built it in terms of like, is it really flashy and cool? That might catch my eye, but it never is really like the final selling point unless all things equal, this person has put in work to market themselves visually. And that in and of itself is an important thing that's becoming more and more important. When I'm interviewing people, I look for openness, friendliness, that ability to communicate and be flexible. More often than not, I'm interested in people who are able to at least navigate the tech and artificial intelligence worlds, not necessarily be experts in it, but if someone were to come to me and say they hate AI, I want to have really good reasons why. And if I hire that person, they probably would have to learn to not hate AI because it's kind of like saying I hate the internet now, right? So that kind of stuff is important to just be open-minded about. And then the one thing that I always look for is someone's ability to empower others. So whether that's their ability to work in a group as a team, or if they're going to be in charge of people, are they able to empower their staff to do excellent work and not be micromanagers, essentially? And you can have people who are micromanagers if they're your manager or if they're your teammate. If you're sitting on a team with someone who always has to redo your work, that person has been hired perhaps in error. And that basically comes down to the most important skills that you can have in your early career, which you just should be working to flesh out as you continue through your career. Because you can be trained in a lot of really technical stuff, but the soft skills like being kind, being empathetic, being able to communicate well, being able to help others do their work better while getting their help to help you do your work better. Those are skills that are extraordinarily invaluable. And so as you can work through developing those, just do it. So the way to do that, though, is new experiences. So me, myself, I'm really, really introverted. You might not be able to tell, but part of the reason for that is because I travel when I can. I speak to many different people whenever I can. I read history because history teaches you a lot of lessons, whether it's autobiographies or actual just events of how things happened in history, that teaches you things about how to approach the future. And those things give me the confidence to, when I get my introversion battery runs low and I need to go and hang out like somewhere and hide, I have the ability to keep on going. And then I do take time to, have that work-life balance so that I can go relax and then come back well refreshed. So that was me.
Hello, my name is Meghan Stanbridge, and I had a totally different career before deciding to go back to school and get my tech diploma. I completed my lit diploma from MacEwan in 2020. Shout out to the MacEwan students online right now. I'm currently working full-time as a library technician for Norquest College Library, and this is a role that I've been in for 1.5 years now. And I do mostly acquisitions type work, a little bit of collection development, and of course, a lot on the circulation reference desk working with students and staff. I myself did not consider moving because at this point in my life, I'm fairly settled where I am, but I was willing to work outside of Edmonton. And I ended up working at a rural school library for about 1.5 years. And the experience of working in a small community was incredibly rewarding. So I would say don't rule out rural libraries or smaller libraries if you're able to make that work. The way that I prepare for interviews is, again, a lot of the same things that everyone has mentioned so far, but I would highly recommend researching the library and the community. And so that would be, reviewing the library and community websites and making sure you have a good understanding of the programs being offered. And then if I would also say visit the library beforehand if you're able to. Of course, you're not always able to, but if you can, it just helps you get sort of the lay of the land. After the interview, try to write down as many questions as you can remember, because this will help you build a log of interview questions that you can use to help prepare in the future. And then the other thing that I do on a daily basis is or maybe not daily, but weekly, is I keep a job diary. So anything that I take on that is sort of above and beyond my job description, I write that down. And any memorable interactions I have with staff or students, I will write that down too. And that will help give me something to draw on in the future if I do have any interviews in the future. And even if you're not in a library position right now, if you're at a different kind of job, I would recommend doing that as well, because in any job that you're in, there will be something relatable to library work. And if you are a current student or a recent grad, your school will have some kind of career center where they can help you prepare your resume, and they can do mock interviews with you. So if that's something that you need help with, they are so great there. I used that service when I was in school. I don't really have, I haven't really cracked the code on interviews. I can't say what's best for interviews necessarily, but I would say if you don't get the job, ask for feedback because it can help you understand what you need to work on. I remember asking for feedback and being told I just didn't have enough experience, and that's what cut me. And that was helpful for me to know. I didn't, it's like, okay, I don't have to take it personally. It just came down to experience. So I think that can help you on your journey. And I would say it takes a while to settle into a new job. I would say it takes maybe close to 3 months before you might start feeling actually competent at what you're doing. But look for training opportunities wherever you can. For example, when I worked at the school library, I worked by myself and there was no one to train me. So I had to reach out to a more experienced technician in my school district. I had to ask her if I could take her for coffee and build a relationship so that then I could bug her all the time and when I needed help. And I would say I have assisted hiring our library assistants here. And what we look for is, even if you don't have relevant experience in a library, maybe you've done some volunteer work. Volunteer work is really can help a lot. If you volunteer for library related events or at a small library, that will stand out. And if you have, any kind of customer service experience is super relatable. So just always thinking about how you can translate the skills that you have into library work. And of course, using the same language and the job posting in your cover letter and resume will help as well. The skills that I believe are most important for a library technician starting out is to be flexible. That's the number one thing. Be willing to take on new projects because that will show that you are dependable and you're engaged. Have good communication skills, time management skills. If you want to work in an academic library, make sure that you have a really good handle on citation styles. Your knowledge of how to use library databases will come in handy. And of course, when working with the public, you will need large doses of empathy and patience, and always have the desire to keep learning and growing. Yeah, and that's it from me. I think, Marissa, you're up.
Well, thank you, Megan. And hello to everybody watching there. My name is Marissa Moore, and I have had a very varied library career. So I started in the Okanagan Regional Library in BC when I was about 15, right the second I could get hired as a page. I worked as a page for as long as I could, and then about midway through my biology degree, an opening came for circulation assistant, the next level up in librarian. So I took that. As you can tell, I always kind of knew I was going into libraries. So because I already had my foot in the door, by the time I finished my bachelor's degree, I had already been working with the library for a number of years. So I was able to take a 1-year leave of absence, travel across the country to get my master's of library science at Western, and then come back to my same system. Now, I didn't actually have a job as a librarian at that system. There was 2 different unions. There was the paraprofessional union and the professional union. And that was actually the reason that I had decided that I wanted to get that librarian degree, because I realized that I wasn't going to be able to rise any higher than where I was. I had hit a ceiling. All of the other jobs required that MLIS. So worked as a librarian at that system in the public library for about 2 more years. And then for completely unrelated life circumstances, I ended up moving to Calgary. Now, in this case, I didn't have the luxury of picking which library, I wanted to stay in the public library, but there was just no jobs and I needed a job. So I was hired on as the solo and head librarian at Alberta Bible College, which was a really tiny private academic institution. Now, this was an incredibly interesting thing because when you're a part of a larger organization like a public library, roles can be very segmented. I had experience in a lot of those different roles because I'd taken the time to apply for different positions, but it wasn't until I was at ABC where I got to deal with just things that I never would have had a chance to deal with before, such as negotiating with vendors, dealing with budgets, trying to digitally be the IT person on figuring out how to make all of my patrons be able to access online resources, cataloging for practicality, publicity, stuff like that. It gave you so much of a well-rounded ability to try different and new things. So I worked at, making policy too. That was a lot of fun. That was where I shined. So worked at ABC for about 4 years though, again, as that solo head librarian. Everything came to me. And then I realized that what I was really missing was the public library. I thrived on administration, sure, but I loved being with people. I loved being able to help with them and programming. And my heart wasn't so much in the research side of things of how do we figure this out. So I decided at that point, it was time to take a leap and to try and get back into the public library. Still no luck in Calgary Public Library, so I spread my net wide, decided to move. And that is how I ended up here, where I am right now at the Toronto Public Library again. So a bit of career hopping all over the place there for me. Okay, taking a breath. So the next question I have here is, did you ever consider moving? Went over this a little. When I first was in the library, at my first job there, I did not consider moving. I was specifically doing this for the ORL. There was no chance I was going to be going anywhere else. I knew I had a spot to some degree. The second place that I went, again, not really considering moving. But once I realized, okay, I have a feel for what the different things that the library world can offer for me, and I know what matters to me most, yeah, I was then willing to move for the job that I wanted. And so, yeah, that brought me all the way across the country. How do I prepare for interviews? Poorly, with a lot of panicking. Interviews are not my strong suit. I think that the most important thing for interviews is being open. I spend a lot of time preparing for interviews, running over and over the programs or the things that I've done, the things that I've done well, trying to find the good terminology so I'm not repeating my words over and over again. But somehow whenever I go into an interview, they always will ask me at least one and usually more questions that came out of left field for me, no matter how much I thought I was prepared. I think the ones that I like most and that I've seen to get on every interview I've ever done is types of like, what would you do in this scenario questions? And they'll give me a very specific scenario and they'll ask me, what would I do in it? And those are fun because in some cases I'm like, oh, I have been in that. I can regurgitate what I've done. And in other cases, it's like, I don't know. And it's a matter of sitting down and then just honestly thinking, what would I do? And not trying to think about what would they like me to say that I would do, but legitimately who I am. How would I put myself out there in that situation? What have you learned over your experiences is best for interviews or at the first month of the job? As I mentioned, interviews not my strong suit, but first month of the job is something that I've had a couple of experiences with and has been really, really interesting. And the big thing I would say about that is that different organizations are hugely different in what they provide for training in each different place. So at the ORL, I got extensive training for every single new position I had within the ORL, and there were many. At ABC, as the head solo librarian, I was hired on, and there was not a single person within the entire organization or who had been there for a year who knew anything about the library. So I was digging myself out of a hole from the get-go. And you just had to be very patient with yourself and recognize that if I don't know it, I can try and figure it out and ask people. TPL was a bit of a different experience. There was a ton of time dedicated to training and a really good online training system, but not necessarily much mentorship. So there was an assumption that you kind of knew what you were doing. And this is something that as I went on and got more experience, I had tried to tease out ahead of time, like what kind of organization am I stepping into? And unfortunately, I found that that is really tricky. Mostly because the people that you're talking to there are so entrenched in what they know that it seems very normal to them. So it's kind of preparing the questions you need to ask ahead of time to get out what is the organizational culture that I'm stepping into. Is there anything on your CV or resumes that you feel was essential? Hiring committees? I have been on a hiring committee at ABC. We dealt with hiring a couple of part-timers and as well as a couple of volunteers, so I was always the solo. For me, what made people stand out was not library experience. You can get library experience, I can give you library experience, and I'll be giving you the library experience exactly the way I want. I can train you in that. What stood out for me was the specific skills that I needed for the position. So if I am looking for someone who is going to be doing all of the promotion for my library, I want you to be competent in tech, communication, maybe artwork. So I was very carefully to what's my posting? My posting was very specific to what I wanted. Tailor your resume to that. Last thing, what do you believe are the most important skills for an early career librarian? First thing, customer service skills. Beyond all, personable. If you can get the people that you're dealing with, whether they're coworkers or patrons, to walk away with a smile, that is the number one most important thing. Second, a willingness to say, I don't know. I have no idea what that is, but let's try and find out together. Because we can't know everything, it's not possible, but we can keep moving forwards. And again, the third thing, as has been said a couple of times here, patience. Just patience with yourself, with what you don't know, with what you need to learn, and patience with others, because especially as a public library, you tend to say the same thing 5, 10, 15 times a day, and you can sound like a broken record, but not letting that get to you and realizing that, well, you may have said it 15 times, they're hearing it for the first time, is really important and can help you get through your day with a sense of joy as opposed to burnout. All right, I think I've answered all the questions for now, at least. I know there's probably more, but I'll hand it right on back to Cole.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all the panelists. That was extremely interesting, both in what was similar and in what was different, which was exactly what I was hoping for. And also just a round of applause to you guys because you did exactly the right timing. Like, beautiful. We've got half an hour left for Q&A. So we're going to move right on into Q&A, which I saw a couple in the chat, some of which I saw some answers from the panelists already. So thank you so much. But I will just start. One question there was two questions that were quite similar. So I'm going to start with that one, and then just whoever wants to like raise their hand, I'll call on you and you can answer. Marissa did answer this one, but I just wanted to give to see if anyone had any other ideas about it, which is, so would it be difficult getting hired as a full-time library technician assistant position in any kind of library without first going through auxiliary or on-call? So I guess just kind of like associated types of positions. And just, yeah, how difficult is that? Does anyone have any recommendations? Is there anyone? Oh, James?
Oh, well, I would just say it's obviously getting harder if you're in a big urban environment, you're at Toronto Public or you're at Calgary Public or something like that. It's going to be harder to get straight in. If you want to go straight into a position, go to a small place. That's just a reality. And then, cut your teeth there. And then if you really do want to be in the big urban places, you probably can go straight into those big urban places. You'll be applying for bigger jobs when you do that. So if you're open to moving, I'd just go someplace small. And small can be relative. Like this library system, we're headquartered in a town of 1,500 people, but we serve, a couple 100,000 people, right? So it's relative, but it's hard to get people to work here. So
I can also give a little bit of my own because so I tried to, my first job out of library school was at Edmonton Public Library System. But I was lucky in that I had a lot of time to, apply before I actually needed a job. So I did 20 or 30 submissions to EPL before I got my first job. So on one hand, options like James says, but the other hand, patience. If you have the ability to have patience and you can just keep applying over and over and over again, you probably will eventually be successful. Does anyone else have any other for that one? No? Okay, awesome. So actually, the other question that was in the chat was for you, James, which was, how does one get international library or LIT job opportunities like you did in Dubai?
that's a great question. You just look for those jobs on regular places like ALA job board, etc. When I got the Dubai job, it was kind of I was on a listserv for innovative interfaces. They use the same product and there was a job posting. I applied for it. I would just say, go with caution, do a lot of research because international stuff, you can get yourself in weird places. Do your research, really study it out. And I don't know if everyone here probably may or may not know, with the United States, if you're MLIS, you can work in the United States. You can get what's called a TN visa. You just need the job offer letter from your employer, your degree, you show up at the border, you get to pay like $30, you get a 3-year temporary visa, you can renew that. Usually up to about 3 times, so 9 years. So you and your family can come with you, though they can't work. So yeah, you just look for them in the same places you look everywhere else, and ALA job board's a good one for that one. Yeah, but the MLS does let you travel a fair bit. I'm not sure about the lit diploma and how that would help. Canada is really one of the only places that has a LIT diploma. They don't do that in the United States, and I haven't really heard of it in other countries as well. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to move to, there was a Google form that I had circulated. I'm going to move to these questions because, oh, sorry, never mind. There's one more in the chat. So Stephanie, you get priority. Do you find hiring practices are different after the pandemic? Are different skills prioritized?
I haven't noticed job or different skills being prioritized. The one big difference that I've seen is a greater willingness to interview remotely. Like I don't think I would have been able to get this position before the pandemic. but afterwards, it was just a given that, yeah, someone's going to know how to do Zoom, and that's going to be okay.
I think, oh, sorry, somebody, oh, Darel,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. When I was just before I started this position, I did a fair bit of hiring at Lethbridge College because there was a lot of changeover happening. And I think COVID was always kind of on our minds, but how it affected each position was perhaps a little bit different. I think it made us much more interested in people who were, like, you hear over and over again, that flexibility and that ability to work in different environments and that ability to, like, the Alberta Library, it's hybrid. We work from home, we work in the office occasionally. Being reasonable in situations like that has become a really, really big and important factor, and being able to illustrate that you're able to be essentially accountable without constantly having someone looking over your shoulder. And I think that's overall been better in terms of work-life balance. I like this idea of empowering people, but you know, there are other schools of thought. But what I've observed is that it's made work itself a bit more flexible and a bit more interesting and a bit more better potentially.
Say there's more remote jobs available than there were in the past, for sure. Like all my professional staff now work remote, and it works great. So if you're into working remotely, probably some more opportunities out there.
I can definitely second the remote opportunity. While I'm working at the TPL here, I still actually have 2 positions that I'm working at back in Alberta, which I'm obviously not going in for, but the remote option is there for the most part.
Okay, so there's another question here. In relation to being willing to move, is there a province that any of you feel has more opportunities, remote or not, for library work right now?
Even I can't speak easily to provinces on this one, but the rural city divide is a big one. If you're willing to go somewhere that's not the major urban center, there will be so many more opportunities, no matter what province you're in.
And some great opportunities, you know, like for example, at the end of the year here, Lac La Biche Public Library is going to have a retirement there. You know, that's a beautiful library, but you got to go all the way up to Lac La Biche. So I don't know about different provinces either.
I would say Saskatchewan, because they don't have a library school. Just take a look at a map of Canada. There are 8 ALA accredited institutions for the MLIS in Canada. And if you just take a look, of course, it's going to be hard to get a job in a city that has a library tech program or an MLIS program, because there are more people applying for the exact same jobs. But you move somewhere else, you go somewhere where there isn't that, and you have a higher chance.
Yeah, 2 things on that. The Saskatchewan was the first place that I got an interview for an executive level like position. I didn't actually get that one, which it's cool because I like the Alberta Library. But you know, it was the first place, so that's always going to be a cool thing. The second thing is I can't, there are so many stories of like librarians who go to small towns and they get paid a fairly okay wage. Some of the small towns have more difficulty with that, some don't. But the cost of living is extraordinarily low. So there's one guy who lives nearby Calgary who works in a small town, gets paid reasonably, lives in a very reasonably priced house, and then goes to Calgary on weekends and like stays in like 5-star hotels to hang out in the town for a while. So it is really something that, as you keep hearing here, don't underestimate it. The other thing is I kept trying to get a job for the longest time in the Maritimes back about 5 or 6 years ago, because it's like the cost of living versus librarian salaries was so great. But now people have been catching on to the fact that the Maritimes is nice to live in, and they're all invading. So time is growing short there.
Yeah, interesting you would say the Maritimes, because that's where I took my MLIS, was at Dalhousie. And it was interesting, the cost of living, because you don't factor in the taxes, or at least I didn't, and I forgot it's 14% there. So very different from the 5 in Alberta. Anyway, so going back to thinking about interviews, what are the best questions you have asked or wish you had asked a potential employer during the interview process? Or I guess from this panelist bunch of people who have been on hiring committees, what are questions that you would want to be asked that would surprise you or make you interested? Go for it, Erin.
Okay, so I didn't do this at the interview for my current job, but looking back, I think it would have been smart if I had asked to see the space where I would potentially be working. So the archives that I walked into was quite messy. That's probably putting it politely. And there had been a fair bit of staff turnover prior to me, so it was in a pretty challenging state. And this was sort of mentioned in the interview by the board, but they didn't really even know the extent. So I think I would have known a bit better what I was taking on had I seen the archives. It may not have changed my mind or anything, but I think an interview should be about kind of assessing fit on both sides and kind of knowing what you're getting into essentially. And then the other thing I was going to say is that I think it's also good to ask if you'll have access to professional development funds, because it's not always guaranteed, especially for smaller institutions or nonprofits. But if you do work for a really good board, and I'm lucky that I do, they will see the value in investing in their employees. But it's always worth it to ask.
Yeah, thanks. And Megan?
Yeah, I was going to say basically the exact same thing, but also I think ask what kind of training and development they offer and like what the training situation will be like. And again, just remember that you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So really think about the kind of place you want to work. You could ask about the culture if that's important to you. And yeah, that's a great idea from Erin, to ask about your work station and that kind of situation. Yeah, thanks.
Darel?
I like that idea, by the way, asking about the culture. That's an interesting one to see how they'll answer that. The other thing that can be really useful is, so whenever people used to ask me, do you have any questions about our organization? I'd always kind of draw a blank, even though I'd gone through and I've looked at everything, and I'd be like, oh, yeah. My best experience was actually when I started asking questions about their questions. So they'll be like, okay, tell me about a time when you do this, or like how to fix this. And then I'd ask them, how have you done it at your organization? What sorts of things have you guys actually experienced? And I would use my experience to kind of have that conversation. So it turned into less of a, here's an answer, and we move on to the next one, and much more of a conversation. So that's how I tend to try to use questions in interviews when I get the opportunity, rather than just trying to ask them questions. For me, it always just kind of became, when can I start? So yeah, that was my experience there.
Thanks. Okay, we'll go to the next one, which is interesting. What are possible accommodations that are available if you work at the library or in your library? If you live with something like chronic pain, or if you have migraines or something like that. So yeah, what kind of accommodations can you have at your library? I think Darel, let's go, Darel.
Okay, I'll be quick. But this one's actually interesting because I've worked with a number of people who either had medical problems or were neurodivergent, and they have very often been just amazing people to work with. But what you need to do as whether you're a team member or a manager of these areas is make sure that you have the right culture in place. And that's why that culture question is so important. The person that built the makerspace at Lethbridge College had some issues, medical issues, but they built an entire makerspace almost entirely by themselves. We just had a particular form of accommodation that we were able to build for them. So being able to have that structure in place, if you're able to put it in place yourself as the employer, great. If they don't have that and you're able to help them build it, good. But they should really be having it in the first place. So yeah, I would just say look for that and don't accept that they don't have it, because it is also part of your rights. Just saying.
I have found that I've worked in two types of environments, a unionized environment and a non-unionized environment. In unionized environments, your rights are fought for. The idea of not getting accommodations for something is just foreign. It will be there. However, I do agree with Darel that there is sometimes a difference between what will be there and culture in that way. That being said, even in the non-unionized environment of the academic library, there was still a lot of forgiveness. There was a lot of, we want to work with you in a way that works for you. Like, I have never had an employer who's like, you know what, we're actively looking here to burn you out and we're not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Like, if you've got a migraine, you go home, or you do this at another time, or we find a way to make this work. And that's been the case everywhere I've ever worked.
I'd say here we do flexible work schedules. We do have some people with migraines. I've set up offices that are dimly lit and, you know, standing desks and all of those sorts of things. I think don't be afraid to ask. You know, it's hard. I know that's hard sometimes, but don't be afraid to speak up. I had a debilitating back issue for over a year. I had a couple surgeries and you know, I had to ask, can I have a standing desk, you know? But not before I had like books piled up and my monitors in odd spaces, and they had to come in and take pictures, and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is, you know, they use it in their slides now, I'm sure, when they're talking about workplace problems. But don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you. Okay, next one is, how transferable are skills between library sectors, and what skills do you see as most adaptable?
I'd say they're pretty transferable. Like I've worked in archives, universities, public libraries, private libraries. But I'd say, so your skills is like, you know, knowledge organization, it's pretty adaptable, pretty movable. That, you know, cataloging understanding, metadata understanding, all of that stuff is going to be, it's going to cross, like there's going to be differences, but it's going to cross boundaries. You know, and those skills of, you know, excellent communication skills, whether that's writing good reports, communicating by email, that's always transferable and will serve you so well. Like, don't be afraid to take some classes in like how to craft emails or properly, you know, how to craft, like, and not sound like a jerk, you know, when you're, because sometimes some of us have that. We have like resting email face. I don't know, whatever it is, right? Like we just come off funny. And so don't be afraid to take those courses, and like, you will learn things.
Erin?
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely transferable skills, just even like your academic writing, research, leadership skills, communications, databases, more, of course. But I will just mention, I tailored my MLIS around archives to fill the gap in availability of archival courses. And so I did a lot of my papers and assignments that were from an archives perspective. And I feel like this probably better prepared me for a career in archives. So if you are planning to do an MLIS and you're not specifically sure if you want to go into libraries, take some other courses, like do records management, archives, or even just tailor something around a different sector, like a project, just for another perspective. But I'll also, my practical skills were gained in the workplace, and working at the U of A archives, the hands-on training was really valuable. And so without this experience, I likely wouldn't be an archivist today. It is a competitive field. And so I think if you're looking to transfer between information sectors, the hands-on work experience is actually going to help bridge that as well.
Thanks. And Darel, I think yeah.
One of the things that I really love about the Alberta Library is its intersectionality. Like whenever I've been working in academics or I've learned a lot from public libraries. So this is something that I think libraries just need to continue to do, is to remember to cross the sectors. The number of things that are transferable, as everyone here has said, is quite high, but the way that you sometimes approach things might differ. But very often, more often than not, you might find that a public library approach is actually the thing that you need in a specific setting in an academic library, and vice versa. So just remain active in all the library roles that you can. There's some really cool stuff happening in private and special libraries as well, that if you learn about it, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, gee, that's something that I should do as well. So don't be afraid to sell yourself.
Marissa?
Well, a lot of these skills have been mentioned, but I'd say the top 4 that I can think of here that are transferable: people skills, time management, communication skills, and the one that's surprised me the most, but is the most important, is publicity, promotion. It does not matter what library you are in. If no one is coming through your doors, it's really hard to justify having a library. So publicity is probably the biggest skill. The skill that I have found to be the least transferable between the different sectors that I have worked in is probably research. Just the level of research that you need to know how to do for the academic library world is far above and beyond what is used once a decade or so in the public library world. So if you're going to go down that rabbit hole, that's fantastic. We need those librarians, but that's probably one of the harder skills to transfer.
One skill that I remember, specifically also the one that a lot of people talk about as a pain point, especially in grad school, is teamwork, like group projects. I've worked in public, academic, and archives, and a group project they'll always be there. Always. And you'll always have to learn how to work with different personalities and work well with them, and not to antagonize each other, because the project is what matters. It's not graded, it's just for your job now. So yeah, teamwork is definitely very important, in being able to work with others. Even if you work in something like, say, an archives or a really small library, you will still need to work with at least 1 or 2 other people, probably. And they might not even be a librarian or an archivist. They could just be a person. So you need to be able to be adaptable to different kinds of personalities. Yeah. Okay. Anything else from that one? I did like that least transferable. That was interesting. Yeah. Let's see. How does career advancement typically work within your sector, and what steps can aspiring leaders take to prepare for upper level positions? Marissa, I think I saw your hand first.
In the public sector where it's unionized, it is all seniority. There is work there for long enough. When it gets to the highest level positions, either the positions that are outside of the union or higher level, if it changes the way that the casting is called, then there is some wiggle room, a little bit of wiggle room for having specific experiences under your belt. So getting those experiences can be helpful, but at the very least, when you're in a big city center in the public library, it is just wait. That being said, that was one of the benefits of going to a small academic library. I jumped to head librarian, no questions asked. So that was just a matter of, I have the skills. Though again, for me, the MILS was a major point in that. Even for that job, had I not had the MILS, I would not have been eligible. So.
I think, James, you were going to say something. You'd be next.
Well, yeah, maybe I was thinking about saying something, but I don't know. For me, it's obviously been moving around, right? That's the fastest way to go up. And I'll just give the example of like going from the public sector into the academic world, spending that first 3 years in the public sector and getting some like baptism by fire and some just crazy stuff. It was very, very good. I walked into the university at a level 3 librarian with 3 years of experience. Whereas if you wanted to get there, it would have been 8 to 10 years, by just starting at a level 1 and moving up. They have 4 levels at UNBC. And so, being willing to move between libraries and pick up and move, yeah, that'll fast track you up, to higher levels pretty quick. Otherwise, put in your time and, you'll eventually get there. People die. Do not wait. Do not wait for people to retire. I will say this, don't wait for people to retire. That was recorded, right? Cool. Okay. So, yeah, just put in your time.
Thanks, Darel.
I could echo the moving around different places. Sometimes you get lucky though. One of my management job before here, the senior librarian there just went to Ontario, and I was kind of a shoo-in for the job, so there wasn't actually even an interview for me. There was a trial period to see whether or not I was going to be okay in the job. But leadership had been something that I'd wanted to do for quite a while anyway. And it had been kind of foisted on me in my first library job. Just because the library was so small, I kind of had to be making leadership decisions all the time, even though I wasn't the head librarian. So my feedback on that, when I asked people for guidance, was essentially just kind of get used to making decisions. Now, to do that, you have to make sure that you're doing the prep work, which is talk to the people that are smarter than you, talk to the people who understand the situation, do your best so that when the responsibility comes down to you to make that decision, you're going to make probably the right one. Not always, but probably. And getting used to doing that and preparing, your mental fortitude if you get it wrong, and being willing to kind of backtrack and get it right the second time is really, really important. And all that can be practiced regardless of what position you're in, but it's crucial to practice it for when it actually starts happening.
Brenna?
I was just going to say it's basically the same as what Marissa said in a school library. It's seniority because you're in a union. I had interviewed for a senior high position, a senior high school, and the interviewer, when she called me, she said, I really wanted to hire you, but I had to go by seniority on this one. So unfortunately, that's something you face, but it just is what it is at this point.
Yeah, and I believe that was honestly why it took so many applications for me to get into EPL, is EPL, again, also has the same unionized environment where seniority is what gets you things. So people were just getting internal positions and switching around. It's just how it goes. Okay. So we're almost out of time here, but we have one more question, and I kind of want to change it a little bit how it is. So it's talking about late career librarianship. And how might your job change over the next 10 to 20 years? What sort of administrative or executive roles or responsibilities might it involve? But I kind of want to hear this from not just maybe the people that I would call late librarian. If you know a librarian at the place that you work that is a late career librarian, what does it look like in comparison to your job? Or if you know what your job might look like down the road, how might it differ from what it is now? That's maybe quite a complicated question for the last one, but Kaia.
So at the University of Calgary, we have the Academic Success Program for all of us brand new tenure track people. And one of the things that they actually did a presentation about was how your career will change going from early career to late career librarianship. So early career, they said, is basically the first 5 years in here, basically until you get tenure. That's it. Then you're in your mid-career after that, and then your late career would be the last 5 to 3 years, wherein you're basically working on your legacy, you're wrapping up projects, you're starting nothing new at that point. You want to make sure things are getting done, you're not taking on too much, and you're getting ready for retirement.
That's interesting because that when I used that term in the Google form, someone informed me like, I don't know if you think you know what you're saying. And I was like, I actually, that's true. I don't know what late career librarianship is. Like, what's the, and yours is not what I expected. The last 3 to 5 years is like so late. That's like end career, which sounds terrible. But yeah, okay. Marissa.
Where do I see myself in late career stages? The careful thing there is I don't want to go and push myself to take a job that takes me out of what I'm good at. So I don't want to go and apply for a CEO position because it gives me more money if I don't feel like I'm a good fit. And I think that for me, my late career is learning more about myself and then gaining stability in the position that I have found is the right position for me. Whether or not that's still on the floor with customers, or whether that's background training, or maybe a head librarian somewhere scheduling stuff, all that's fine. But I want it to be a fit for me, regardless of what the world says. This is the ladder to climb.
Yeah, and even, oh, sorry, James, I was actually gonna comment on you, so you can go.
Well, I was just gonna say, I've worked with some late career librarians. The person that was in this chair when I was first in Northern Lights was 75 when he retired. My last boss, when I left, she had been at that institution for 47 years and retired after 50 years at the same institution. You know, I will probably die in a chair kind of like this. This is one of the beautiful parts about librarianship is that you age like fine wine, right? I think you just get better and better at your job. You get more patient. You know, you think about like the difference between your parents and your grandparents. I think a steady individual as they get older is good. As long as you have your mental faculties, you're in a good place career-wise. I think librarians work in nicely heated and cooled air-conditioned places. So I think you can work a long time in library land, and you probably will because we don't get paid very well. So you can't. Good luck retiring. So you know, yeah, I think we age well in these careers. So enjoy that. The thing I don't want to be is the person that people are just dying to have them retire. You know, so as long as you're staying nimble and ready for change, I think you're going to be just fine. But as soon as I find myself wanting to do the same things I did 5 years ago or 3 years ago, then I might be getting too old. So.
Thanks. Well, if no one else has anything to say, which I will, if anyone has any like final thoughts they've had over the course of all of this, feel free to share it. But it is 3:31 now, one minute past the deigned time period. So if no one has any final words, I was gonna say, yeah. So thank you so much. I feel like I've learned some things, which is nice, as you're constantly learning stuff about your jobs, even when you are mid, early, late, whatever career. Just like James said, it's good to keep learning. So thank you so much. And I just want to let everyone know that it's participating, that this was recorded, and I will send it out. It might be a little later because I am going on vacation in 2 days. So it might be a little bit early March, but you'll get that recording. Don't worry about it. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, back to your job or just off into the wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Go on.
Yeah.